So first up, we have Lisa, who's going to be talking about describing cost management in Azure. Lisa, the floor is yours.
Sounds good to me. Well, I think I might have a few times where I start my screen, but we'll just see how far we can go, and then maybe I'll take it from there if you don't mind. But yeah, I think cost management is incredibly important on the Azure platform. I think, we've all heard stories that we might not want to think about, which are high bills. So cost management is incredibly important. Gregor, do you remember the first time that you got like a high bill for a customer that you didn't expect?
Yes, I've even done it for myself, to be honest with you. I've spent some Azure credit and got caught out by not putting a budget in place. So yes, I do,
Uh-oh.
unfortunately. I've done it recently.
Well, budgets is, a topic that we're going to speak about for sure. So it's good that you mention it. Yeah, I have a friend that wanted to try out, the SQL pools from Synapse Analytics. I don't know if people know this, but it's one of the more, let's say, I would say, arguably more expensive tools out there, especially if you have the dedicated one. So he deployed a dedicated pool and then forgot about it for about 3 months, which is quite a long time. But yeah, if you don't access your resources or your subscriptions that often, that can happen. So after 3 months, he got a bill for 30,000 euros. So yeah, this is why it's so incredibly important to think about cost management when you have resource groups, when you have resources on the Azure platform. So for the AZ-900, Microsoft wants you to know about certain things that might affect costs. Oh, I see a story from Carl in the chat. My cost management nightmare fast track enable DDoS protection. DDoS, I think they would say in Dutch. I don't know how you would say it in English. Can you guys help me out here?
Yeah, DDoS. Yeah.
DDoS? Okay, it's the same. Okay, fair enough. Well, things that affect costs on Azure, of course, have to do with the resources, right? So if we deploy a storage account versus a database, Synapse Analytics, Azure Data Factory, things like that, or maybe that web app, resources are priced differently. So types matter. And then, of course, usually these resources, they're pay as you go. So for example, the storage account, as you store more and more data in there, we pay more and more every month for that data storage or for accessing that data, etc., etc. But also the consumption plan matters. So I will show this to you maybe again in the cost calculator for a bit, but consumption plan also matters in the sense that for some resources, we can reserve these resources for, let's say, 1 year or maybe even 3 years or more. And then, we pay a little bit less for these resources. A thing that we don't always think about, but can actually hugely affect costs, I would say, is the place where the data center is. So if we deploy in West Europe versus maybe another region like North America or something like that, then you will most likely see that the costs change. And for some time, like sometimes going from data center to data center or region to region, these costs might be quite different. Well, then we also have, of course, the subscription type. So we might have, let's say, that pay as you go subscription, but we also have subscriptions where we just have Azure credit, for example. And of course, that's priced a little bit differently. One of the things that you might also see in the AZ-900 information is they talk about the Azure Marketplace. Well, of course, on Azure, where we have our marketplace, most of the resources that we would immediately see, these are provided by Microsoft, but there are also resources that are not provided by Microsoft, but are checkboxed, are okay by Microsoft. And if you purchase one of these from the third-party vendors, well, then of course that also has their own pricing. So it's not really a thing that affects costs, I would say, necessarily, but they do mention it. So it's good to know that, that's around. And then I would say this is also a good point to remind ourselves about that operational expenditure versus that capital expenditure, right? So when we move to Azure, we're moving from that capital expenditure to that operational expenditure, meaning that we don't have to buy all of our servers, all of our machines, all of our storage up front, but we pay for what we use. So we go from having that capital expenditure, so spending on capital basically, to that operational expenditure where we pay per month for what we use. So we don't have like a big bang at the beginning, but we do pay for it every month. All right, Gregor, if we can go on further. So this was the point where I would want to maybe take over, if you don't mind, and then I will show the pricing calculator, because this is the point where they find it, important. So let me try and do that. Can you guys see what I'm seeing?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, so I'm adding the cost affecting factors in Azure, right? So first we were talking about resource type. Well, I mean, it's maybe a little bit obvious, but let's say I'm going here to the pricing calculator. Here you can already see, quite a large amount of products. So if I add a Cosmos database, it's added to that cost calculator, and I can see all of the things that affect the costs in that Cosmos database. You can see that this is way differently priced than, let me scroll up a bit, than, for example, a storage account, where we all have like different things that affect costs. So this will also differ from resource to resource. So if you want to deploy a certain resource, it's also always really, really good to go to that, cost calculator and see what is happening and see what affects the costs. So resource type is incredibly important when it comes to cost, and not all, resources are priced equally. So some resources are arguably quite expensive, like these SQL pools, dedicated SQL pools that I mentioned. And other things like storage accounts are considered to be a little bit more cheap. Then usage, of course, is also incredibly important. If I want to store a little bit more, let's say I want to store 1,000 terabytes instead of gigabytes, you can see that the price is going up with like quite a lot for storage. So the more that we store in that storage account, the more that we pay for it. Then also, as I mentioned, the data center that we put it in, like I had it in the central US, but if I go, this doesn't really matter, but maybe here you can see that UK South is a little bit more expensive than central US, which I don't know, makes sense, I guess, depending. I think UK South is quite popular. What do you guys think? You're from the UK?
Yeah, yeah, that's quite popular. It had some issues to begin with, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting how it costs more.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mm.
it's true.
One thing I just wanted to make people aware of is I
Mhm.
don't think a lot of customers that we have are aware that you can go to the Azure pricing calculator and just type in and figure out how much things cost. So it's
Yeah.
quite an interesting thing.
Yeah.
You can go and see how much things cost before you actually, you can change all the settings and change the regions and all that. So yeah, it's actually really brilliant. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important. So yeah, to go there and to think about these costs critically before you incur them, because then at that point it's too late, right? But yeah, a lot of these tools, they are pay as you go. So is it really an estimation or a guesstimation? That's a thing that we can discuss, but at least it gives us an idea on the realm of potential costs that we're going to have. Yeah, so I think, as I said, one thing I wanted to show you still is that, for example, we can see it for the Cosmos, but it's also for the SQL database. Here, if you do 3-year reserved, then you will actually see that, the costs here are already going down quite a bit. So if you have reserved instances for example, that SQL database that I just showed, then we just pay a little bit less. So that's also cost affecting factor, I would say. All right. Shall we just take over the screen for the slides, for the remainder of the slides?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah,
Because I think.
we have a question for you as well.
Oh, okay. I didn't see it.
Do ingress and egress costs vary by service and region?
That's a good question. My best guess would be yes.
Yeah, it
But it
does.
would
Yeah,
depend from resource to resource, probably,
yeah, it
as
does.
well. Yeah.
Yes, it depends on the service and the region. So yes to both is the answer. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Let me see if I Because you still see the pricing calculator, I think. Okay, let me go for the slides. Fencer. Yeah, so that pricing calculator is incredibly important to, get like a grasp on. But the thing that they also mention is the total cost of ownership calculator, which I thought was pretty interesting. I hadn't really checked it out, to be honest, before this course, but this total cost of ownership calculator is specifically for customers that are willing to migrate to the cloud and kind of want to play around with, okay, how much could I potentially save if I moved all of my workloads to the cloud. So I had a screen open for that as well. There's a lot of sharing today, not too handy of me. Let's just go for it. So if we go to that total cost of ownership calculator, I've already pre-filled in some things. Well, here you see already the results. And I thought it was very funny because I made it like to be like so that there were no cost savings. So, and it's good to consider that as well. I mean, moving to the cloud, of course, it's very hip and happening, but not for everybody always does it, have to mean that we have cost savings. We can also have scenarios where we might be even more expensive, in the cloud compared to on-premise or equally. But just to check out, the total cost of ownership calculator, here we have the potential to look at servers or databases or storage. So I already predefined some things like I have a database for sure, on premise, and that might be Postgres, and I might have some physical servers running on a Linux operating system, for example. I might have some file shares here for 5 terabyte, maybe, not very massive, but still. And then we can just go through all of these steps and we just read through it very carefully and we adjust some of our assumptions. Maybe we have some of that geo-redundant storage that we need, etc., etc. And they have more assumptions and you just go through it entirely. And then in the end, they will give you a report and say, hey, you might be able to save some money in the cloud, or you might not be able to save some money in the cloud. For me personally, to be frank, I do feel like, if you're already running, then you kind of already know what your costs are. So I don't think we would necessarily need Microsoft to tell us what our costs are, if that makes sense. So for me personally, I would maybe still go to the pricing calculator to find out what the cost of these Azure resources are and then make a comparison, myself. But then again, if you don't have any idea where to start, then this can also be a really good way to start because it helps you to think critically about, these differences of having, the machines physically running in a data center, by yourself, or having it on the Azure platform and stuff like that. So it's pretty cool to check out. I wouldn't say it's a must, to be honest. All right. And I'm going to change the screens once more. Yes. So that was the total cost of ownership calculator. And here I have a link to that predefined calculation that I had, just if you wanted to check it out. But if you can also just Google it and you'll find it and you can make your own estimation. All right. So that cost management, what we just talked about, right? That is incredibly important because if we don't manage our costs correctly, we're going to have a bad time and we might have an extremely bad time and end up with a bill of 30,000 euros. And you don't want that, right? So Azure does offer us with a lot of options to help us manage our costs. And one of the things that I want to show you guys in a bit is that cost management dashboard. And what we can do on Azure is we can set budgets and we can set alerts on these budgets, which is pretty cool because you can say, well, maybe I want to spend every month, let's say $100. Then I can I can set that budget and then I can say, well, send me an alert if I exceeded that budget by 50%, for example, or by 90%. And then I can get a text or a call even, or probably usually an email saying, hey, you're actually, exceeding that budget. And then I can act upon that, which yeah, sometimes we forget, and then we remember that we really have to do that. Next to budget alerts, there are also things like credits. So if you have a subscription that has credits, then you can set these credit alerts. I don't have an example of that because I don't have such a subscription with me today. And then if you have departments, you can also have like spending quotas per department, and you can set an alert on that as well, which is pretty cool. Cost analysis option I'm going to show you in a bit. And of course, this is quite handy if we want to optimize our resources, right? Because you get insights into what these resources are costing us, which is interesting because we can act upon that. So if we see, for example, that a database is costing us a lot of money, and then when we look in the database, we notice that a lot of computational power or a lot of storage isn't being used, then, well, we know we can scale that down. So I think that is pretty cool. And Azure also helps us with some invoice management. So let me show you what I mean so that you can kind of get an idea of what that would look like. Right. So I have my subscription here. That is a Visual Studio Enterprise subscription. It's pretty run of the mill. I don't have that much costs here for you guys today, but I do have some other screenshots that look quite a bit more fancy. But just to click around here in your subscription, you already have that cost management tab, right? So that's going to load for a few seconds because it's grabbing all of that information for, all of these resources that I might have. And here you can see I don't have that much of a spend. It's just the beginning of, the month. I don't think I have that big of a spend. Okay. So, but what we can see here is like per service name. So we can see that I had some storage, right? From the last course, arguably, where I stored some of that squirrel data in that storage account. So that's costing me like 16 cents. And then you can see, I think maybe Simon deployed a virtual machine and that costs me 5 cents. Then I wanted to play around a bit with the Azure Data Factory. So that cost me like 3 cents. So here I can already see in the pie charts, like the differences between the costs here. Then if I want to have more of a location, then I also have UK South. So I think that's also going to be Simon with that virtual machine. And then here, of course, I'm in the Netherlands. So West Europe makes the most sense to me. I can also see it per resource group. Then if I want to set a cost alert, then I can go just here. Well, here I can see the cost alerts that were, triggered. And then if I want to set a budget, then you can see that, for example, here I have my own budget set. If I want to edit that, I say, okay, well, this is my budget. It's per month and I have a threshold of 50. And then I can set an alert here as well. Say, okay, well, if 50% of that budget of $50 is exceeded, then, send me an email or an SMS and send it to my Hotmail. And then if I were to exceed that 50%, then I would get that email and, I would know, okay, I need to scale some of the resources down because, this is getting quite expensive. All right. So maybe just to show you a little bit more of a sexy screenshot, because I think, this is not that impressive on the cost. Well, this is, for example, an example of a budget. So here I set a budget of 1.2K per month. And then you can see, the forecast going up and saying, well, I don't think you're going to exceed this amount. And here in February, this is, the amount that we spent, which was about 90 euros. So this is one of the views that you could see if you set a budget, which is pretty cool. And then here you can see a little bit more of a sexy pie chart. I would say this is from the Microsoft Learn website. And here you can see that for some subscription, they had a spend of about $54,000, which is quite a bit more than my budget at this moment. But here you can already see they have so many resources, the service names, like the differences there, that they spend about 18,000 on virtual machines and the regions where this is in. So I think, yeah, overall, that is pretty cool. And one more thing that could help us save, or help us manage our resources are actually tags. So tags are another handy thing in Azure that we get. So we can tag a resource saying, well, maybe it's part of an implementation. So let's say we have some websites and then we tag it for that implementation, or maybe we want to build a data platform and then we tag our storage accounts, our Databricks workspace and data factory, that data platform name. Or what I did is that I tagged the resources based on the video that we were making so that I could see, what resources apply to that video, and I could easily arrange these resources. And that's really handy if you want to simplify your resource management, right? That makes sense. I think the purpose of these tags is mainly, for resource management, and all of these benefits are kind of like, an extension of that. But it can also help us with cost management because, well, we can, order these resources based on these tags. Also help with operations management. If we think about security, maybe some of our resources have to comply with some security rules, maybe internal rules set by the company or external rules set by the government. Then we can tag these resources to let us know, hey, these really need to be compliant, so that we can, get a better grasp on that as well. Then when we think about workload optimization and automation, well, as I said, maybe some of the things, dev tests, production, resource tagging, anything that you can think about that might help you, when ordering resources. It really depends on your own use case, I would say, but a lot of companies use it. I think, Simon, you guys work for Intercept, right? And I think you often tag resources as well. I think Simon might be for a toilet break.
No, I'm here. I've just got
to find the mute button.
Yeah, I've got two different mute buttons.
Oh.
Yeah, so we so I've got one on my interface and then one for Lighthall. But yes, to answer your question, we for our monitoring solution, we tag various resources in Azure, and then we have a script that then goes through and iterates and pulls them into our monitoring solution based on what tags are deployed to our customers, and it works really well.
Oh, that sounds really cool. So I would say, yeah, there is so many things that you can use these tags for. So I just wanted to show everybody real quick what that would look like in the Azure portal, so that you would kind of know what to look for when you are in the portal. Because, yeah, the idea of tagging sounds great, of course, but, what does that really, really look like? So let me show you the portal just one final time. So here I have my subscription, right? And it's pretty cool. And I might have a amount of resource groups here. And I had that storage account that I used last time, right? So here I have the tags for the storage account, and it just says part 3. So it was for video 3, but I could also maybe say part, and I say 4. I don't know if this is, oh, I cannot do that. Part 1. That didn't really make sense, but maybe I wanted to do like environment dev or environment prod, which would have made a little bit more sense, of course. But yeah, that's basically the idea behind tags. So you just tag a resource saying you're it, you belong to our dev, you belong to production, or you belong to that video, or you belong to that implementation, and that helps us to order things, and that has a wide range of benefits, I would say. So definitely check it out if you're busy working on Azure. Yes. And I think, let me share the screen. I think that's about it. Yes. So were there any questions in the chat? I didn't check. Sorry about that.
We do. We have Dippin is asking, is it possible to set a budget, and once that budget is met, the resource is terminated automatically, for example?
Does it depend from subscription to subscription type? For the normal pay-as-you-go, I'm not sure. I don't think so.
I don't think there's an out-of-box solution, but I think if you could tie it to an action group,
yeah,
and then do something manually yourself via like an automation account to either shut down or to kind of delete resources, but it's not a out-of-the-box option, I don't think.
Yeah, it's one thing I also never really understood, because that's the thing that you would want, of course. But yeah, I don't think that's out of the box possible. But you would really have to do things to get that
Yep.
working. Yeah.
Okay, so I don't think we have any other questions. Carol, thank you for sharing all of those awesome links. One of them was azureprice.net. I'd never seen that before. That's
Oh,
very cool. Yeah, you can go in there and compare the prices of virtual machines. So that's very handy.
we'll definitely have to do that
Yeah.
someday.
Thank you for doing that. Lisa, thank you very much. Next up, we have Simon.